As we move a little further south, we head down to Houston and talk CONCACAF Champions League, Houston Dynamo, and whatever else is on his mind with Sebastian Salazar. Sebe!
Hey, what's going on, man?
I just didn't know how to introduce you at the top of the show before we had Mike Petke on. Are you Comcast Sportsnet Houston, Sebastian Salazar, or are you NBC Sports Network, Sebastian Salazar? I don't even know how to intro you these days.
I am Comcast Sportsnet Houston, Sebastian Salazar, but as you know, the corporate structure here, we are run by NBC Sports. So my paychecks have actually always been NBC Sports.
Well, speaking of, you brought up the corporate aspect of it, and I do have a question as it relates to corporate or the national platform of NBC Sports Network versus your local platform in Houston. The girls that you pull, is it a higher class when you were a post-game at Rio Tinto, or are the Houston girls still winning out because of your consistent presence on Comcast Sportsnet?
I tell you, the women in both Salt Lake City and Houston are beautiful, and I wouldn't want to choose one over the other.
You PC the crap out of that, Sebi. Come on.
Well, you can't offend. I don't have the luxury of being able to offend a large portion of women. That really cuts down into my
good point.
Into my prospective hopes.
Good point. In all seriousness, it was fantastic to see you last week on NBC Sports Network for the Friday match. Great match, Real Salt Lake versus Portland Timbers. And you didn't feel the need to give me the heads up that you were going to be behind the desk as the host of the festivity. So it was a great surprise turning it on and then seeing you getting me all primed for the match. So just really, really proud of you, Sebi. Great job.
It was awesome. And you know what? Like, I could not have lucked into a better match to call, and just to be a part of the call even, and the crew that you get to work with, to sit on a desk with JP Dellacamera. I mean, he's been calling World Cup games since I was 2. Brian Dunsteth knows RSL so well, and it was great to work with, and they're great people too. And then the matchup was just so awesome. I hate to say this, I know this might upset some DC folks, but the other NBC game, which, got the first NBC team, the proper team, was New York, DC. And they sent us to do Real Salt Lake Portland. And, to me, I was pretty glad to be on, quote unquote, the B team, because we really got the A game. I mean, it was such a good game. You knew it was going to be good. And I was so relieved because we really, in the pregame meetings, in the pregame show, we hyped it up. We said there's going to be goals. And what do you know? The teams delivered, and it was a great game, really a great performance from RSL more than anything else, I thought.
And I got to say, great performance by the host as well. Few nervy moments, but overall, you were calm and composed over the microphone at Rio Tinto.
So you couldn't tell that I was sweating bullets and having my life flash before my eyes about 2 minutes to air?
Here's how I knew, or how I know that you were going to be okay and are going to be okay doing this as you move forward. Halftime, you threw it to a graphic that didn't come up. You had the moments. You reset yourself. You continued speaking. Then they threw the graphic up, and instead of backtracking back to the graphic, you kept pushing forward, throwing into Dunning, and I was like, this guy can roll with the punches. He's going to be all right.
Yeah, we got our plug-in for Scion or whoever it was, and I said, I've done my duty.
Let's move on.
We're rolling, yeah. And you know what? It was true. I think it was stats that we were supposed to see.
Yeah.
I think I said, hey, this game doesn't need stats. It was good enough on its own.
Perfect.
And that's the kind of truth of the matter. The first half had enough elements of intrigue and controversy and great goals that it was a lot of fun. And I tell you, the setup at Rio Tinto, the scenics of that stadium are amazing. You're right at the kind of the front of the Wasatch Range there, and really like the supporter section right behind you pumps some energy. People always talk about ESPN College Game Day, that kind of live setting. Yeah. I felt that energy. I hope it came across in the shows. When we had Javi Morales on in the post game, to have them chanting Javi as we're doing the interview with him, that's what it should be about, and I think that's one of the really cool elements of that stadium. And I had a ton of people from RSL hitting me up after the game, like, "Hey, NBC's got to come back here." And I was like, "Listen, man, I don't have that much weight, like I just hope they let me back on, and then I'll start asking, I'll start declaring which games we ought to do." But Rio Tinto and that fan base, they came through big time, sold out the place, and it was an awesome atmosphere.
I like how you just threw yourself onto the B team. So that's a done deal now. Sebastian Salazar on the B team.
I did not say that. On this weekend, I was fortunate enough to be invited to partake with some guys that are, are really just great soccer and specifically MLS broadcasters, and like JP. I mean, to work with a guy like that, and then to get to know him and to hear some of the backstories, like. He kind of guides you through a broadcast and tells you what to do and how to calm your nerves. But I always have to travel with a suit, and so I find myself wearing a suit because I can't pack it in a suitcase because it'll get wrinkled.
Yeah.
And he's like, "You don't have to do that." And he showed me, "Hey, there's a spray you can buy, and you can fold it this way, and you can travel." So, I learned so much about beyond just television, but actually, how to be a professional adult.
Can we talk about other things other than you, Sebi? Jeez.
Yeah, I didn't want this to go down that road, but I guess it kind of did off the top.
I actually really want to get into the team that you cover, which is Houston Dynamo. And we were talking about getting you back on at some point, and we wanted to get you on in August. It just didn't work out with scheduling and stuff. And, for me, August, and especially now that we're in September, is the time where the Dynamo start to actually put their best foot forward. It feels to me, especially the last few years, they just kind of tread water. They work out their kinks. They see who they are. And then once the playoff push begins, they, like the cream, they begin to rise to the top. And, after the Sounders match, I was like, oh, we got to get Sebi on because the Dynamo push is about to begin. And I want to get his thoughts on what went into the push. And then they get their doors kicked in from Montreal, have a little bit of a struggle in CONCACAF Champions League before pulling out a result in the last match, and then have to scrape out a tie against Chicago. Why hasn't the push begun?
Well, something that's plagued this team all along. There's kind of two things. I don't know that they don't have a consistent starting 11 that every day. This is a guy. This is his role. We've seen different guys move from the outside of midfield inside. Brad Davis, Boniek Garcia, guys who can certainly play both roles, but at some point, a team and a player and a formation needs an identity. I don't think they've settled on that yet, in large part due to international call-ups. There's been some injuries as well, but call-ups have just nailed this team, and right now they're without Jermaine Taylor, Boniek Garcia. And then, the forward play has been very inconsistent. And it's been inconsistent because there really hasn't been much of a push. You've got Giles Barnes and Will Bruin, two guys who certainly have their qualities. And in back-to-back games, the home games against Columbus and Seattle, they were on fire. You throw out the Real Salt Lake game in the middle, that was a road match. But then they kind of go through these spells where you'll see them in games, and against Montreal, there were a few chances, but there really wasn't that consistent final third attacking threat, and they've missed that. I think they still need an element of pace. Kalen Carr is expected to at least be in the 18. He traveled to Chicago, wasn't in the 18. He's expected to be back Wednesday in the 18 against Columbus. That's huge. If he can come back and be 60% from right from the get-go of what he was, the player that not dominated, but was a big influence on MLS Cup, and worked towards 100% by the playoffs. That's going to be a major factor. The other issue is Omar Cummings. I mean, this is a guy that they brought in with major expectations. I don't know that they thought they'd get exactly 2011 Omar Cummings, but they're disappointed in what's happened. He struggled, just got back on the practice field now, still dealing with the issues from his preseason knee surgery. Just hasn't been able to kind of get over the hump. If at some point they get him back, that's great. But I think at this point, that's a really big if. You can't count on him and maybe even Carr to really be the impacts that you thought they were going to be at the beginning of the season. Though since you've got two of those guys, you say, okay, one ought to land and one ought to stick and do something for us and at least give an extra element to the attack, but also push Giles Barnes and Will Bruin for that playing time. Because right now, whether they produce or not, they're going to be the two starting forwards.
It's interesting that you would say that because where I thought you would go, especially looking forward, is as they wrap up CONCACAF Champions League group stage stuff into the fall, that the depth of that team is really, really strong, considering that they don't have high-priced DPs. They have DPs, but not high-priced DPs, and they have really good depth. But what you said kind of contradicts that in saying they haven't trotted out a consistent starting 11, which kind of intimates taking Carr and Cummings out, that they haven't settled on. They have too much depth almost.
Yeah, I think that's too much depth. I hate to say that because that's never a problem. That's always a good thing. But I think it's more an issue of you've got different guys who can do different things, and at some point. And this may be the point of the season where they finally find that. As you said, Dominic Kinnear teams get good in September, better in October, and usually by November they're clicking and doing their thing and making a run. That's at least what's happened the last 2 years. The depth is there, but the depth is, if you've got a guy that, like, let's look at their center back situation, right? You've got Bobby Boswell and Jermaine Taylor. So Jermaine Taylor's gone. Well, Eric Bruner gets hurt against Chicago. Now all of a sudden you're talking about Anthony Arena, a guy who basically was one of the last guys to make the roster. He's played in one game so far this year, albeit it was in Columbus, and it was a pretty good performance. But you're asking a rookie to step in and play center back potentially this game against Columbus in a situation where we're in the dead heat of the playoff race. That's a risky proposition. So, you've got guys, you've got bodies, but I don't know when your two speed guys, Omar Cummings and Kalen Carr, aren't there. There's not much depth there in terms of players after those two that can give that element. So you got a lot of guys that can do a lot of things, but the two things you really need, a center back pairing and speed up top, those positions have been hit really hard by either injury or international call-up.
And the one guy that I did have circled to counterman or counteract that depth argument was Bobby Boswell, who is trotting out and just playing 90 in every single match, Champions League, no Champions League, he's playing 90, and that would be the guy that I would say to myself, okay, look, it's weird to say because I remember him as a 22-year-old rookie coming into the league, but he's not a young guy. Is there concern that he could be run into the ground as we get into the important fall months?
I think Bobby knows at this point how to take care of himself. I think truly Dominic Kinnear knows how to take care of his older guys. If that was a concern with Bobby, you would have seen Bobby maybe missing some of those games, those CCL games here and there, if it was really truly a need. They've got some ways that they can cover guys at the central back position being out. You can move guys in and push other players out. Jermaine Taylor can play either outside or in the middle. Warren Creavalle could potentially come back and play center back. So if they really needed to give Bobby a break, I think they could do that. Bobby's one of these guys, he's not going to eat up a lot of ground. He's a smart center back at this point in his career. He works the system. He knows where to be. He positions himself well. That being said, that defense has had its issues. I mean, people will look at the goals against and they'll say, wow, Houston's defense, that's right, what we expected. Listen, Tally Hall is the reason that Houston's defense has conceded as few goals as it has. He's having a phenomenal season. This guy is – I know we always want to talk about Nick Raimondo, and Nick is a great goalie in his own right, and Nick makes a lot of spectacular saves. Some of that is due to his height. And Tally doesn't make as many spectacular saves, but, boy, I can't tell you how many times a game will end in a shutout or with just one goal scored by whoever Houston's playing, and you say, well, that easily could have been 2 or 3, that Tally makes point blank great saves.
Look at the save on against Chicago. He saved the match in like the 89th minute.
Listen, by the time it's 30 minutes into that game, Chicago could have been up 2 or 3-0 without much. Mike McGee is one-on-one with him. There's a double save where he stops McGee atop the box right after beating Chris Rolfe to a one-on-one. I mean, the counter issue with that is that the Dynamo defense is getting beat more than I think people notice and more than they ever expected to get beat. There's still some issues back there, and I don't want to say just the defense. Defending is a whole 11 thing. It starts sometimes in midfield. If guys lose their marks, they're not tracking back correctly. You get a numbers game, and then your defense is kind of left there hanging. But it's happened a lot more than in previous years, and yet still the goals against is amongst the lowest in the league, thanks in large part to Hall.
Talk to me about Alex Lopez. How are they working him in? What can I, the average MLS fan who maybe not is familiar with Alex Lopez's body of work, what can I expect from him in MLS as a member of the Houston Dynamo?
Young player, right? So I think it's more of a long-term view with him. You paid a seven-figure transfer fee, so this is a look for the future. He is a more, I'm not going to say number 10 because that would make Dominic Kinnear infuriated. He hates it when he's at number 10. That doesn't, what does that mean? The guy wears number 10. He's a little bit more of a central attacking guy. He can play out on the wing, but the Houston Dynamo don't really use a number 10. So if he's going to settle into that midfield role, it's going to be as a part of a matchup, whether it's him and Ricardo Clark, him and Adam Moffat, him and potentially Warren Creavalle, because Creavalle has really been a big surprise this season. He's come a long way in year 2 of his MLS career, a really bright spot for the Dynamo. And but Lopez has some flair, got a heck of a shot from long range, and is not afraid to use it. He can absolutely hit lasers, which a lot of guys on this team can. And Jason Johnson, Adam Moffat, just to name a few. So there's some of that. I think it's going to be a while until we see him necessarily in a starting role. A lot of that depends, how many minutes he gets is what happens with Ricardo Clark. He's been dealing with an illness for the last couple months. We don't have too many details. The team is being kind of mum about it. But he came out of that Seattle game. That was about 2 weeks after he came out of the Columbus game, very early. Just didn't feel right. Was having some issues. And, if you're not feeling right and you play a game here in Houston, you're losing, 7 pounds of water in a game, you're going to really feel wrong. So they've got to get Ricardo sorted out, because you can ask Adam Moffat to do a lot of work, and Adam is certainly willing and capable. But Ricardo is really the heart of that midfield, the responsible, accountable guy in there that covers that ground. So not only does he have to be in there, but he's got to be healthy and fit to do the work that you expect from him.
You know me, Sebi. I always like to eyeball young guys who may not contribute right away and may not contribute within a year. Suni Saad was a guy that I had eyeballed a while ago, and now he's starting to come into his own. I asked you last time about Brian Salazar and what can we expect from him. Last year, preseason, I was down in Orlando at the Disney Classic, and I saw Warren Creavalle, and I said, "Wow, this guy's very, very active." And didn't do much of anything last year. As you mentioned, he came into his own this year, playing in a number of different positions. Where do you see him ended up being his best position?
It's funny you say that. We, here in Houston, we talk about Warren, and we wonder, does his versatility actually hurt him? He can play so many different spots. He can play outside back. He can play central defense. He can play out on the wing. I think probably his best position is maybe in that central midfield role. Not too different from Ricardo Clark. A guy that eats up a lot of ground, wins a lot of 50-50 challenges, does a lot of the little stuff, and moves it quickly but dangerously. Gets the ball and finds the right people with the right pass. He's not going to miss a lot of passes. He's just really precise, and he's pretty aggressive. When Warren gets the ball, a lot of younger players you'll see, they'll look to go lateral or go back or take that extra touch to feel comfortable. Warren gets it, turns it upfield, and pushes the issue. And I really like that about him. I think not enough young, certainly American players do that. So that's something to watch for from him. But to tell you really, truly what his best position is now, it's really hard for me to say because we haven't seen him play one position enough to have a body of work that would really shed light on that.
Let's talk about Champions League, and we'll start with Houston's Champions League run so far. Win and a draw as they move forward. It trotted out kind of a B team or at least an A- team in both matches. Obviously, they're taking this seriously, so that's not the right way to ask. But are they really just hoping that they can get this group stage sewn up early so that they can focus on MLS playoffs?
I think you have to understand that the priority here is MLS playoffs. That's everywhere, and as it should be. You have to trust your second team if you're an MLS squad. Not your second team, I shouldn't say that. You've got to trust the guys in your 18, right? The 12 through 18, maybe a few other guys. they have to be able to get results against a W Connection and an Arabe Unido. That's just the bottom line. And MLS should be at that level at this point. The Dynamo were disappointed to go to Trinidad and not come away with 3 points there. It was a sloppy game, a really ugly game. And the one thing that you saw was you saw a lot of guys that hadn't played together. The lack of continuity in that game made it brutally hard to watch. The game here against Arabe Unido, the Panamanian side, was a disaster for many reasons. The refereeing was terrible, and I think it really impacted the game in a way. And give the Panamanians credit. They came in, they were on the stretcher, coming off on stretchers, 5 times in each half. The game stopped every 5 minutes. There was no flow, and they disrupted what the Dynamo were going to do. They got an early goal, and it was nervous. But eventually, there's more talent, even on the Dynamo reserves, than there is on Arabe Unido. That's just the bottom line. Cam Weaver scores a goal, pushes in another one off the defender that's marking him, and they get through. But I think any MLS team, if you're going to especially with how loaded Houston's August, September, and October schedule is, and how important those last 3 games are in October, you've got to say we have to rely on these guys. Otherwise, your A team, your potential starters are going to be out of gas when it really matters, and that's the thing that Dominic Kinnear does best. He manages players. So I think the results may not be pretty against these, CCL group play opponents, but they don't need to be. You just have to survive, and that's what we're seeing so far. It's barely survival, but it's survival.
Before I let you go, we got to talk about the column that you just posted at pitchpass.com. And, I keep talking about it, and Pitch Pass is now more than just a podcast, and it's in large part due to Sebastian and his columns. It's an interesting read because it kind of takes you behind the scenes of a CONCACAF Champions League match. And, the thrust of the article, and I don't want to give that away because I want people to go there and read it, but the thrust of Sebi's point is CONCACAF is kind of making Champions League a less enjoyable experience than what it could be. And you focus in on a couple of things. I think let's just focus in on one, and we'll leave the other two for anybody who may want to go to pitchpass.com. Talk to me about the media aspect of it and how CONCACAF makes it more difficult for even local media to do their thing and promote the match.
Yeah, I mean, I work for a regional sports network. CONCACAF Champions League, especially in a place like Texas, is still not all that well understood. Sure, your Dynamo faithful love it, but you need to branch out beyond that. People need to understand what this tournament is about. We wanted to go live an hour and a half before the game. We're not showing the game. We're not infringing on Fox's broadcast rights, and it wasn't a Fox rule. It's a CONCACAF rule that simply would not allow us to go live from the stadium an hour and a half before kickoff. So what we can't do then is I can't, as a soccer reporter, adequately promote the event, right? I can't explain to people, hey, this is why we're here. This is why there's this team from Panama here. This is what's at stake. Eventually, this could lead to playing a big-time Mexican team here in Houston, and eventually playing Real Madrid in the Club World Cup, and really jazz it up a bit, get people excited about it. They took that away from us, and then they wonder why on a Tuesday night 1,500 people show up. On the other part of it is, the Dynamo here broadcast their games on the radio. They do a really good job of it. Well, CONCACAF, and I'm going to say this, I think it's just a pure measure of greed, wants an extra, I don't know what the number was, but an extra few shekels for what's called a rights fee to broadcast the game. So what they effectively end up doing is they say, okay, radio stations, you want to broadcast? Radio station says, well, yeah, but not for X amount of dollars. Yeah. Because we're not making money on this. We're doing it for the programming. So the radio stations don't do it. So now CONCACAF has lost not only the exposure of the radio stations, but anybody who wants to listen to it is simply cut out. And as a result, I think the tournament loses importance and loses its relevance to the markets, to the local markets where you need to sell tickets, which is at the end of the day what this is about. So it's kind of this backwards philosophy of, hey, let's try and make a couple $100 here. No, that's not what this is about. Build the tournament now.
Yeah.
Let's acknowledge it's still in the building phase. And then in 2, 3, 5, 10 years, you'll be filling stadiums for these matches.
And make a couple of million rather than a couple of hundred.
It's just foolish. And from a media perspective, and you know me, I'm going to bang the drum for soccer. But if you're going to make my job more difficult, suddenly then I start to question the importance of Champions League.
It's a great column. He's got a couple of more points as to how CONCACAF kind of dampens the game day experience if you're on site for a Champions League match. You can check out at pitchpass.com along with this podcast and everything else. Sebi, we didn't really get to talk about much about the rest of the league and, of course, our beloved DC United. So that means we're going to have you back on in the next few weeks to go around the league if you want to.
Absolutely. At any time. I love doing it. Love writing for pitchpass.com. And you got my number whenever you need. Although I will big time you now.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Take it easy.
All right. Later on, Reg.
Pitch Pass.
This is your voice. This is my red, white, and blue. This is my anthem to you.
For more show information, go to pitchpass.com.